Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the Milken Institute, Managing Director, Europe, and Executive Director, Katie Riley.
Okay, I'm going to do that introduction one more time, because if anyone knows me, you know my name is Katie O'Reilly. I'm Executive Director at the Milken Institute. Nice to see all of you. And this is James Morgan, our Managing Director for Europe.
I am supposed to be up here by myself, but they sent Katie to pull me off if I start talking too much, so that was a good ad-lib. I just want to thank everybody, first of all, for coming today. We couldn't do this without your support. I think you'll agree, starting at 7 o'clock this morning, it's been a day full of insights. I hope you've enjoyed it so far. We've got even more in store for you this afternoon. The mission of the Milken Institute is to increase global prosperity by advancing collaborative solutions that widen access to capital, create jobs, and improve health. That mission and this summit would not be possible without the support of some very generous organizations. So please join us as we thank them.
The Milken Institute wishes to thank our underwriter, sponsors, and media sponsors for their support. Without their generosity, our work at the London Summit would not be possible. Our underwriter, WorldQuant. Our London Summit sponsors: Apollo Global Management, Bearings, Brunswick, Citi, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, Generation Investment Management, Guggenheim Partners, Jefferies, McKinsey & Company, Moody's, PGIM, Providence Equity Partners, Schenkman Capital, Shaw Capital Group, State Street Bank and Trust Company, 2 Sigma. Our media sponsors: The Financial Times, Thomson Reuters. We also thank our strategic partners for their significant annual support of the Milken Institute: Apollo Global Management, Bearings, Bombardier Business Aerospace, Citi, Diamond Resorts International, EJF Capital, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, Golden Tree Asset Management, Guggenheim Partners, the Helmsley Charitable Trust, Jefferies, Principal Financial Group, Sumner M. Redstone Charitable Foundation, Sanofi, WorldQuant. We gratefully acknowledge the participation of the organizations whose generous support makes this conference possible.
Okay, thank you again to our sponsors and strategic partners. So anyone who's been to any Milken Institute events knows you don't get away with lunch or dinner without contributing to some quiz questions. So we have 2 we're going to get to before we start the lunch program. So the first slide, this is going to be an informal polling. You can just raise your hands. So it is true that sandwiches were named after the 4th Earl of Sandwich. Hold on, that's not the question. Why was the sandwich created? A, so the Earl could stay at the gambling tables without interruptions for meals. B, he and the missus enjoyed picnicking in the outdoors. Late one night, the Earl raided his kitchen, creating an MLT sandwich. Do you know the answer, James?
Yes.
D, it was created so that guests could eat without making a mess at one of Earl's outdoor spring soirees. Or E, it was commissioned so that his soldiers could eat while riding their horses, thus reducing travel time and allowing surprise attacks. Okay, so show of hands, who thinks it's A? That's a lot for A.
An easy question.
Okay, why don't we see the answer? Have we used this one before? I feel like we have. What's the answer? Okay.
It's went worse than planned.
Okay. The next one. So urbanization is a big, no, next one. Next one. Well, we already know the answer to that. Okay, so urbanization is often a big theme at a lot of our conferences. So as of 1900, you may not have all known this, there was only one country with more than 50% urban population, and that was the country we're in right now, Great Britain, you can see on the map. By 2000, you can see how this changed. So this represents countries with more than 50% urbanization. Okay, so the question is about urbanization. For almost a century, London was the most populated city on Earth. It was displaced in 1925 by A, Paris, B, Tokyo, C, New York, D, Shanghai, E, Calcutta. Who thinks it's A? Not many. B, C, D, E. Oh. What's the answer? C. See, we got you guys on that one. Okay, we're gonna let you get back to lunch and then we'll finish the program. Thank you.
Thank you.
Please welcome Chairman of the Milken Institute, Michael Milken.
So thank you for joining us today, and for me, this brief little talk bookends my very first speech on Wall Street, late 68, early 69, which was the best investor is a social scientist. And as we've mentioned to a number of you, there was this book published in 1982 called Megatrends by John Nesbitt. And in this book, in the second chapter, the chapter was focused on high-tech, high-touch. This is 1982, 34 years ago. And we talked about the principle that symbolizes the need for balance between our physical and spiritual reality. And as technology moved forward, you needed to be able to interact. So just a couple weeks ago, we have a new book by Tom Frieden called Thank You for Being Late. And it's an exciting book. It's a title for me since I'm always late. But what he did was he thanked you for being late because he listened to various conversations in the room while I was waiting for you to show up. And it was really interesting in this book. He had a chance to speak to the Surgeon General of the United States and said, "What is the biggest disease in America today?" And the answer of the Surgeon General, it's not cancer, it's not heart disease, it's isolation. And so even though people might be more, quote, connected to one another or to a device, he pointed out that great challenges in our world today where people feel isolated in their life. Same thing, covering 34 years. So why do people play video games? Many of you might know that there's over 300 million people playing each other in video games, and they now sell out like rock concerts. And with us at the at the London Summit has been one of the founders of Tencent here, who holds the largest video game company, among them Riot Games. So why do they play video games? And the CEO of Electronic Arts answered it this way, that once you get past air, food, water, shelter, you get into social connections, the sense of belonging, you get self-esteem, et cetera, and ultimately you get self-actualization. We are providing self-actualization for a great many of our players. So the question is, what is a meaningful life today in the 21st century? And can we provide meaningful lives to the citizens of the world? Dostoevsky, who was always in a state of depression, pointed out, deprived of meaningful work, men and women lose their reason for existence. They go stark, raving mad. Maybe a better person would be Eleanor Roosevelt, who said, the purpose of life, after all, is to live it, taste the experience to the utmost, to reach out eagerly and without fear for newer and richer experiences. And a young recent Nobel Prize winner pointed out, I don't mind if I have to sit on the floor at school. All I want is an education, and I am afraid of no one. And so it'd be unusual to think of the CEO of a video game company giving us Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So as we step back, and almost all of us learn this in either high school or college or even middle school, first issue is, can we deal with the physiology issues, food, water, housing, clothing, etc. And the challenge for many of the citizens in the world today is not all of those are available. Then the question of safety, which also is a fear for many of the people living on this planet today, is that with the next level up. And then love and belonging, interacting with another human being that both Nesbitt and Tom Friedman spoke about. Higher levels then move to esteem, and then what the head of a video game company told us, self-actualization. Nesbitt had no knowledge of video and esports when he developed this, but the challenge for us in every society, and one of the reasons why Shakespeare is so popular today, is the same human motions of hundreds of years ago exist. And so you ask the question today, what is the most important thing about your job? And it was really interesting in looking at these responses. Number one response was my coworkers, interaction with other people, more than the interest in the work they were doing. We've talked over the years about a number of things that cause the middle class in the world, and particularly the United States, to lose good parts of their net worth in the U.S. residential housing. And this slide just reinforces for you the challenge we have today with the level of median net worth. And you can see here in the United States, after Greece, it's the second lowest at $50,000. So half the people in the United States are worth less than 50, half the people more. And what's interesting here, you'll see, is almost 30% of the people in the United States have a net worth of under $30,000. Juxtaposed, you will see also that the United States has the highest percentage of people that are worth more than $1 million. And this wide divide in the United States is a challenge for the U.S., and we used to look at these numbers and think of Brazil or other countries, but today it's in the U.S. If you look at median income in the U.S. and compare it to 2015, to the end of the 20th century, you'll see that unadjusted for inflation and increase, but if we adjust that for inflation, today you'll see that the median net worth, median income, is actually below where it was in 1999. Now, this is not just the United States, but it's Italy and other countries. Maybe a more sobering view of the United States would be if you took a look at the fact that 50% of the households, 50% of the United States, if they had an emergency, health emergency, they could not come up with $400 without selling or borrowing money. So I think this should help explain, and here's another look at America. 1 in every 6 working blue-collar American men are out of the labor force. They're no longer in the labor force today. Worse than any other country except Italy. More than half of those are on prescription painkillers and 2/3 on opioids. So tomorrow in the United States, the U.S. Senate will, in my opinion, pass a bill called 21st Century Cures, which allocates more than $1 billion to dealing with opioids. And so in many ways, the challenges of Dostoevsky have come to root with the fact that our societies have not been able to increase the median income or the opportunities for the citizens, whether it be in the United States, Europe, or other parts of the world. If we look at median income in the United States, and this chart gives you a look at where the highest median income was in the U.S., California, Washington, the Northeast, Colorado, and Illinois. And let's look now and see if we can get a look at. Thank you. Let's look at the vote now. How did America vote? And except for Texas, you see almost a perfect correlation. Let's go back one slide, between income and the vote in the United States. So we've all seen these pictures in the front of our newspaper, whether it's Brexit, whether it's Trump, whether it's Italy, whether it's the anti-globalization efforts as far away as Chile and Peru today. And so the enormous challenge in front of us. In 1965, I created this finance cube. And if we look at it, how you finance a company, how you build a company. Your first decision is, what is the company? Developing the correct capital structure for the company, then the industry, then what's going on in the economy, what's going on in capital markets, and those four are generally what you study in school. But the two most important elements in the building of any enterprise relate to regulation, and any country, any city could pass regulation that could put any enterprise out of business. And then the most important of all, society. Does society feel what you're doing is worthwhile? Is it positive for society, etc.? Because it's society that later decides what are the regulations. So besides the challenges of income and a lost 15 to 16 years for much of the world's population, the other fear is of technology, innovation, disruption, and accelerated societal change, both what Nesbitt and what Tom Friedman has written about. And we have looked continually at industry after industry, all of subject to some form of disintermediation, disruption, and potential loss of jobs. By far, the greatest risk in the world to the loss of jobs is in agriculture. If we look at the United States, for example, 98% of the population in 1800 lived on farms. It dropped to 40, and eventually today, it's less than 2%. Scientists recently have even been able to improve on photosynthesis. So we now can find a way to make the sun more effective in making plants grow by at least 15%. But when we talk about scarce resource, here's a recent point by the Department of State that pointed out just implementing one intervention of precision agriculture, a farmer can eliminate 50% of water usage and at the same time increase output by 16%. Hundreds of millions of jobs are potentially to be lost sometime in this century to modern productivity and agriculture, whether it's vertical farming or some other form. There isn't a day that goes by that company after company, whether it's Google, Instagram, and various Facebook, interact with millions or billions of people on our planet. A young company that started just a couple years ago in Southern California, Snapchat, in 1 year went from 2 billion to more than 10 billion page views. And so as you look at the media industry as we know it today, Apple is worth more than all the major media companies in the United States today, and Google almost as much. And how do you compete in a world where content is going to move to your smartphones and other devices today versus those media companies that the world was their oyster. I couldn't have been more excited by this article in the paper and in Fortune magazine in 1997. I had financed Barnes & Noble and felt Len Reggio knew more about books than any person on the planet. And how excited was I to read that anything Amazon.com can do on the internet, so can Barnes & Noble. Barnes & Noble's fate isn't to rest on a website. Once you look beyond the website, you can't understand how Amazon is to concede in this battle versus the $3 billion Goliath, Barnes & Noble. And at that time of the story in Fortune magazine, Barnes & Noble was worth 50% more than Amazon. Well, less than 20 years later, there's been a substantial change in relative value. And for the shareholders of Barnes & Noble, that article did not prove true. But more telling is, let's take a look at the major retailers in the United States. And if we go back to 2006, 10 years ago, these major retailers had a market cap of $400 billion. Now, if we take a look at those companies today, all of them have done poorly. Walmart has got added 2% in a decade. Some of them are down more than 90%. And the total value of these large retailers in America today is substantially less than it was a decade ago. Let's take a look at Amazon. Amazon was a large company back in 2006, at least in the marketplace, having a value of $17 billion. Its value has increased 20-fold. And the companies, those 10 companies, were worth 23 times what Amazon was worth a decade ago. Today, Amazon is worth substantially more than all of those companies are worth combined. So you can imagine labor-intensive physical businesses and their challenge today. A company that changed the world of retailing for the world, Walmart, the world's largest company measured on revenue, announced earlier this year that it was going to close, this is Walmart, 269 stores, of which 154 were in the United States, at the same time that Amazon announced that it's going to be using drones. So if the world's largest retailer with unbelievable logistic systems is facing a hard time competing, they and others are now reaching out for a solution. Most recently, not too long ago, a company that was losing, a small company called Jet. Walmart bought Jet to take on Amazon. Let's take a look at a cute little advertisement for Jet that you would have not normally seen at a Walmart store.
The old economics of saving money meant you had to buy items in bulk. And that's weird. Because 5 pounds of mayonnaise is actually a fundamentally ridiculous thing to buy. When you're done with it, you can live inside the jar 7 years from now. That's how long it's going to take. Jet.com is transformationalizing the shopping club. So now you can buy human-sized mayonnaise and millions of other human-sized things at teeny tiny prices.
So obviously that ad is also addressing the warehouse stores. Let's look at another challenge that companies have today. Macy's, valued a little more than 100,000 employee. Walmart, a little more than 100,000 employee. Even Sony and IBM, valued at hundreds of thousands an employee. Let's take a look at the, quote, new media companies. At the very bottom of the list is Facebook, valued at more than 25 million an employee. If you believe the key is to hire the best employees, most talented people in the world, then Facebook has an enormous advantage. Obviously, it can offer its employees substantially more in other benefits, valued at 25 million an employee, Walmart, with almost 2 million employees, a $1 increase in wages cost them $3.5 billion a year. Recently, in the United States, there was a study done on what is the most common job in the most number of states. These were the choices: teacher, secretary, truck driver, customer service, or software developer. The answer, truck driver. So for me, looking at driverless cars, driverless trucks, drone delivery, does not put a fear. Even a warehouse worker today is a risk. Let's take a look at this video.
This is a grocery warehouse. We service grocery stores with dry goods items. We receive directly from the manufacturer and stock items and then deliver them to the stores by their request. So if we received in coffee, it would be not just a case of coffee, it would be a full truck of coffee in pallets. We'd take those pallets, load them onto conveyors, and then the first robot would take that pallet apart layer by layer. And then those layers would then be broken up into single case quantities and then stored within the structure by the next set of robots. We'd then receive the customer's order, and they would give us an order for coffee, and then for peanut butter and mayonnaise and whatever else they wanted. Those cases would then be retrieved by the bots and then brought out to a third set of robots, which would then build the customer's order in a pallet to their specification. People do not handle the product in the automated system. On each shift, we have 5 to 6 associates out on the floor that are monitoring the system and there to resolve any issues that come up and keep the lines running. It's running essentially 20 to 21 hours a day and 7 days a week.
So you can imagine the challenge. Cyber attacks. If we think about those today and the growth of companies in this area, this is U.S. statistics. Median time it took for a company to detect a cyber attack in 2015. They discovered it 1 week later. They discovered it 21 days, 102, 140, almost a year later. The answer is it took almost 5 months for the average company even to recognize they had a cyber attack. So it isn't, the challenges are not just blue collar. Let's take a look at banking and finance. You might not be old enough to remember that you used to have to deposit your paycheck and you had to wait in line at a bank and all those tellers. Today, that's not necessary. And when I started and went to Wall Street in 1968 and 69, the great opportunity was to be an equity salesman. You had fixed commissions. And so if you wanted to buy, let's say, 5 shares of Berkshire Hathaway, your customer gave you that order, you got 1%, you got paid $11,000. Today, if they give you an order to buy 5 shares, if they can't negotiate and have no buying power, they'll pay you $7.95. So what was income of over $11,000 is now $7.95. And whether it is the fees of managers and the movement of ETFs, all of this continues. Medicine is not separated from this. If there's a tremendous change in the world that will change it for all of us, is the cost of sequencing the genome, going from more than a decade in billions to a couple hours and $1,000, and the cost of sequencing dropping far faster than Moore's Law. Robotic surgery. Less blood, less trauma, less time in the hospital. Substantially, the very first one occurred in the United States in 1992, actually occurred earlier in Europe. By 2012, there were 400,000 robotic surgeries, estimated to reach the market of about $18 billion in revenue by 2020. So let's look at your opportunity. There was a company called Intuitive Surgical. In 2011, this is 9 years after the first one, the stock was still selling for $6 when they pretty much had the market to themselves. The stock is up 100-fold, the market cap's up 100-fold today. And you can ask yourself, if you were a surgeon spending all those years, if you haven't learned to do minimally invasive robotic surgeries, you are performing a different function today. Pathologists versus the computer. In recent studies of the world's leading pathologists, 2 pathologists only agreed with themselves and their outcomes 60% of the time. The need for machine learning and computers is with us, and today MD Anderson and other major cancer centers around the world are loading all their data into IBM Watson in order to take a good look. So nations that are the leaders in bioscience will be the leaders in the world. And one of the interesting things is this has not gone unnoticed on China, and you can see the enormous growth in China of their investment in bioscience. If we look at pharma versus biotech, and much of the innovation today is in biotech, you can see the dramatic difference here between the US and other countries. Europe and the US on the left is pharma, on the right is bio. In closing, we have enormous challenges, but the promise of finance is how to solve those challenges. We all grow up looking at the world's map, measured by the size of continents, and this is the way it looked many years ago, and this is the way it looks today. Africa makes up 24% of the world's landmass. However, it only makes up 3.3% of the world's economy. And projecting that 40% or more of the world's population will be living in Africa by the end of the century. The challenge for everyone is how do we create opportunities in an economy that can meet the needs of their people. And that has been the goal and the mission of the Milken Institute in many ways, has been to widen access to capital, create jobs, improve health, and we do this through independent, data-driven research today through our various centers. In closing, I want to stress again, as I have with many of you today, the importance of finance. I'm not going to ask for a show of hands, but you can ask yourself, how many of you went that work in the field of finance to change the world? And in many ways, the world is totally dependent on the financial community. Access to capital, generating a rate of return, providing retirement savings, and building the new companies of the future. And I just want to give you one example of something that the Institute had worked on a number of years ago. SO2 admissions in the United States led eventually to a series of movies and everything about how we were all going to die from acid rain. And this is a look at parts of the United States, 1989, 1991, particularly in the upper Midwest, the amount of acid rain represented by those dark red and orange. We worked with a number of people. Richard Sandor led our efforts in creating sulfur index security. So if you reduced your admissions, you got credits. If you couldn't reduce your admissions, you had to buy credits. And within 5 years, through these financial incentives, the United States was no longer making movies on how we were all going to die of acid rain. And I challenge those today in the audience, and we challenge the members of the Milken Institute constantly at our Center for Financial Markets and other centers to try to find ways to create new markets, new securities, to meet the needs of the people. And obviously, the recent elections have told us that in democracies, if we don't meet and create opportunities for people, there'll be opportunities for change in government and policies. And we're a small group today. Maybe there'll be 800 to 1,000 of us here. But as Margaret Mead told us, never doubt that a small group of thoughtful citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that does. Thank you for joining us.